Lorraine, France, September 1944. Morning fog hung low over the fields east of Arracourt. Dew clung to the grass, engines rumbled somewhere in the distance, and the smell of gasoline drifted through the chill air. Along a country road, a column of American vehicles waited, jeeps, Shermans, and a few lean, low-slung machines with open turrets and long-barreled guns. Their crews called them Hellcats. To the men of the 704th Tank Destroyer Battalion, the M18 Hellcat was more than a vehicle. It was a gamble made of steel and speed. Barely 20 tons, its armor could stop only rifle fire, yet its engine could drive it faster than any tank in the world, over 50 miles an hour on open ground. It was built not to endure hits but to avoid them. When the U.S. Army introduced the Hellcat earlier that year, it broke with every convention of armored warfare. At a time when other nations added more armor and heavier guns, the Americans had chosen agility. The Hellcat's thin plates and powerful 76mm cannon embodied the doctrine of the tank destroyer: strike first, move fast, and vanish before the enemy could respond. Crews quickly learned that survival meant motion. They fought from ambush, hit flanks, and trusted that speed was the only shield worth having. To many, the machine felt alive, responsive, temperamental, and deadly in skilled hands. And soon, in the fields of France, they would learn just how alive it could be. By early September, General Patton's Third Army was racing east across France after the breakout from Normandy. The 4th Armored Division paused near the market town of Arracourt to refuel and reorganize. Supply lines stretched thin, and for a moment the front grew quiet. In that stillness, the men cleaned their guns, checked their engines, and wondered when the next fight would come, though the answer was already on its way. Unseen beyond the mist, the answer was already forming. To Adolf Hitler and the German High Command, the American pause looked like weakness. 2 newly raised Panzer brigades, the 111th and 113th, waited with Panthers and Panzer IVs, ordered to strike hard and restore German initiative. As night settled over Lorraine, the fog thickened again, swallowing the distant roads and muffling the sound of engines. Somewhere to the east, German armor was moving. On the morning of September 18, 1944, the 111th Panzer Brigade moved north toward the town of Luneville. The area was already under attack from the 15th Panzer Grenadier Division, and the situation for the American defenders was tense. Company B of the 704th Tank Destroyer Battalion held positions on the heights northwest of the town. Under the cover of artillery fire, its M10 tank destroyers engaged German armor throughout the day, making good use of the ridgelines to mask their movements. By evening, 3 German Panthers lay burning in the fields, their dark smoke curling into the autumn sky. As night fell, reinforcements arrived. Combat Command A rushed forward elements of the 37th Armored Regiment together with Lieutenant Richard Buss's platoon of M10s. When Buss detected 2 Panthers concealed behind a railway embankment, he coordinated a careful ambush. After several precisely aimed shots, 1 Panther burst into flames while the other withdrew, likely crippled. The Americans had held their ground, but the loss of Lieutenant Colonel Bill Bailey, commander of the 704th, to a mortar shell the next day reminded everyone that the struggle in Lorraine was far from over. While Luneville remained contested, German attention shifted north. The 113th Panzer Brigade, newly formed and eager to prove itself, advanced toward Arracourt. Its armored spearhead mixed the newest Panther tanks with veteran Panzer IVs, a blend of power and reliability that reflected both Germany's ambition and its dwindling resources. Around midnight on September 19th, an American listening post near the village of Lezay heard the distant rumble of engines and quickly called down artillery fire. The barrage scattered the approaching column but could not stop it. When dawn came, the entire landscape was enveloped in a dense, motionless fog. Visibility shrank to almost nothing. At 7:30 that morning, Captain William Dwight of Combat Command A stumbled upon the tail end of a German tank column creeping along a country road. He quietly pulled back and radioed the alarm to Lieutenant Colonel Creighton Abrams, commander of the 37th Armored Regiment. Minutes later, 2 Shermans from Abrams's command encountered the head of that same column near Lezay. A Panther appeared out of the mist scarcely 75 yards away. Both Shermans fired first. The Panther shuddered, then stopped, and before the Germans could react, 2 more of their tanks were disabled. The remainder slipped back into the fog. The reports reached the CCA command post quickly. The German offensive was underway. Captain Dwight was ordered to reinforce the threatened sector with tank destroyers. Captain Thomas Evans, commanding Company C of the 704th, selected Lieutenant Edwin Leeper's 3rd platoon of M18 Hellcats for the mission. The vehicles moved northeast from Rechicourt-la-Petite into a world of grey mist and muffled sound, their engines barely audible through the heavy air. As they reached the forward area, shapes began to form in the haze, broad, low silhouettes moving steadily toward them. German armor was approaching. Evans ordered his platoons to take up hull defilade positions, exposing only their turrets above the shallow depressions in the ground. The fog made range-finding almost impossible. The gunners could not rely on telescopic sights and had to estimate distance by instinct. Lieutenant Colonel Hal Patterson later explained the method they used: one high-explosive round to find the range, followed immediately by armor-piercing shells once the distance was judged. When the first German tanks emerged, the air was split by the crash of guns. Each muzzle flash betrayed its source, and both sides fired through the fog at the light they saw. Within minutes, 3 Hellcats were destroyed. One was left helpless when its engine stalled as it tried to climb out of cover, drawing a storm of fire until it was consumed. Another was struck while attempting to tow it back. Yet despite these losses, the Americans continued firing methodically, shifting positions after each shot to keep the enemy guessing. The Hellcat's agility, its ability to accelerate, fire, and relocate within seconds, became its true armor. Corporal Frederick Stewart, gunner for Sergeant Emile Stacy, destroyed 2 Panthers before their vehicle was hit, wounding both men and killing another crewman. Nearby, Corporal John Eidenschink under Sergeant Pat Ferraro accounted for 3 German tanks before his own Hellcat was disabled. Sergeant Steve Krusky's crew eliminated 4 Panthers before being forced to abandon their vehicle. Only Sergeant Edwin McGurk's Hellcat remained fully operational, and his gunner, Corporal Dominic Serentino, added 2 more kills before the firing subsided. As the morning wore on, the fog continued to swirl across the fields, hiding movement and blurring sound. The duels now took place at distances measured in yards rather than miles. The long-barreled guns of the Panthers, designed for engagements at 2,000 meters, offered little advantage in such conditions. Realizing this, Captain Evans reorganized his remaining platoons on the higher ground south of Rechicourt. Alongside the engineers of the 24th, they formed a thin defensive line shielding the command post and the artillery batteries behind them. By midday, the mist began to lift. Through the thinning haze, observers counted 30 to 40 German tanks advancing toward their position. Evans waited until the lead vehicles reached 1,500 yards, then gave the order to fire. The first 2 Panthers erupted in flames, and confusion spread among the others. Several turned sideways in the open, exposing their weaker armor. From carefully prepared positions, the Hellcats fired with calm precision. Within minutes, 11 German tanks were destroyed. Evans later described the moment with understated clarity. It became a turkey shoot. His crews loaded and fired as fast as the breaches could cycle, moving between shots to avoid return fire. By the time the smoke cleared, the 113th Panzer Brigade's attack had broken apart. Among the gunners was Private Frank Amido, fighting his first day in combat. In that brief engagement, he personally accounted for 5 enemy tanks. Later that evening, General George S. Patton visited Evans's command post to view the results. From the ridge they could see the valley below littered with burned Panthers, their hulls twisted and blackened. Colonel Bruce Clark, commanding CCA, introduced Evans as the officer who had directed the defense. Patton nodded and said simply, "This is the kind of thing that's going to end the war faster than anyone hoped," before turning back to his jeep and driving away. The sun was setting as Evans and his men looked out over the wreckage. The field below them was silent except for the crackle of cooling metal. What had begun as a desperate German counterstroke had dissolved into ruin. Yet even as they watched, the fog began to return, creeping once more across the battlefield, concealing both the dead and the living, and setting the stage for the next day's fight. When dawn returned on the 21st of September, the same heavy fog rolled once more across the Lorraine plain. The men of Combat Command A believed the Germans had finally withdrawn. After 2 days of relentless fighting, the quiet seemed almost unnatural. By 9 o'clock that morning, the American columns began to move northeast, advancing cautiously through the mist. For a brief moment there was hope that the enemy had broken contact. But only half an hour later, movement ahead betrayed a different story. Out of the whitened fields came the sound of engines, the crunch of tracks, and the metallic echo of turrets turning. The 113th Panzer Brigade had regrouped. Hidden by the fog, it struck again, this time toward the rear of the advancing American columns. The Germans intended to split CCA in two and roll up its support units before the tanks could respond. Reaction came almost instantly. Both American columns swung about and formed defensive lines facing south and east, bringing the 704th Tank Destroyer Battalion, Field Artillery, and companies of M4 Shermans into coordinated action. The fighting around Arracourt quickly turned into a confused, swirling melee. Visibility changed from minute to minute. One moment a crew saw nothing but grey vapor. The next an enemy silhouette filled their sights at 200 yards. Hellcats fired, reversed, and darted to new ground, while artillery batteries behind them poured shells through the fog at flashes of German guns. 6 German tanks were destroyed in the first exchange. By midday the weather began to clear. Reinforcements from the 691st and 602nd Tank Destroyer Battalions, together with the 320th Regimental Combat Team of the 35th Infantry Division, reached the field and strengthened the line. What had begun as a potential breakthrough turned into a grinding armored engagement that lasted until nightfall. The 37th Armored Regiment lost 7 Shermans, but in return at least 18 German tanks were left burning. The next day, September 22nd, brought scattered skirmishes as the Americans methodically swept the fog-choked ground they had fought over. Near the village of Juvilliers, a German probe penetrated the positions of the 25th Cavalry Squadron, knocking out several light tanks before withdrawing. Close by, Lieutenant Marvin Evans of Company B had already endured hours of misplaced American artillery fire that fell short of its intended targets. When the cavalry began to pull back, Evans detached one Hellcat to cover the withdrawal. At just 600 yards, that lone tank destroyer engaged 3 German Panzers in quick succession, disabling all of them before falling back itself in a leapfrogging retreat that exemplified the doctrine of mobility under fire. But even as the Hellcats pulled back through the mist, the battle for Lorraine was far from over. More German armor was still advancing, and the Americans knew the fight would return with the morning. By nightfall on the 22nd, the results were unmistakable. Across the Arracourt sector, the Americans and their attached tank destroyer units had destroyed 79 German tanks at the cost of 14 Shermans, 7 light tanks, and a single M18 written off. What had begun as a German counteroffensive was rapidly becoming an American victory. Yet the enemy was not finished. On the 23rd, the 111th Panzer Brigade, still clinging to orders from higher command, launched another combined tank and infantry assault from the east. The Americans were ready. From the high ground northeast of Juvilliers, U.S. tanks engaged the advancing Panzers with measured volleys, while fighter bombers of the 9th Air Force broke through the clouds to strafe German columns and blast the infantry trying to move through the village of Marsal. The effect was devastating. Vehicles burned along the roads, and the German attack dissolved under the combined weight of artillery, air power, and the rapid maneuvering of the Hellcats. During the final phase of the battle, Captain Thomas J. Evans once again distinguished himself under fire. When 2 of his Hellcats were knocked out, one burning and another crippled but still able to fire, he climbed aboard the damaged vehicle and used its gun to destroy 2 approaching Panthers before the Germans finally set it ablaze. Evans crawled clear through smoke and debris, continuing to direct his company's fire until the attack collapsed. His conduct at Arracourt and later near Moyenvic earned him formal recognition for gallantry, including the Distinguished Service Cross and Bronze Star Medal, reflecting the determination that defined the tank destroyer crews throughout the Lorraine campaign. By late September, the outcome in Lorraine was beyond dispute. The once proud Panzer brigades had been shattered. Their tanks, rushed into action with little coordination or reconnaissance, lay scattered across the rolling farmland of eastern France. German communications were in disarray, and fuel shortages prevented any sustained counterattack. The soldiers who had mocked the paper-armored Hellcat now faced the reality that speed, flexibility, and teamwork had achieved what brute force could not. But beyond the wreckage lay a deeper lesson, one the army would carry long after the guns fell silent. In just over a week of fierce fighting, the U.S. 4th Armored Division and its Tank Destroyer Battalions destroyed nearly 285 German tanks and assault guns, while losing fewer than 35 of their own. It became one of the most decisive American armored victories of the war. The Battle of Arracourt marked the effective end of Germany's large-scale armored counteroffensives in the West. From that point onward, the Wehrmacht would fight a defensive war, retreating toward its own borders under constant pressure. The Hellcat had proven its worth not through armor or intimidation, but through the disciplined application of doctrine. Its crews had demonstrated how mobility could serve as protection, how speed could replace thickness of steel. The open-top turret that once seemed a liability gave them exceptional visibility in the swirling fog, allowing them to detect and engage targets faster than their opponents. Combined with the firepower of American artillery, the precision of air support, and the coordination of infantry screens, the Hellcat became part of a seamless network of combined arms that defined Allied success in 1944. In tactical terms, Arracourt validated the American approach to armored warfare. It showed that even against superior German machines, the Panther with its long 75mm gun and heavy frontal armor, victory could be achieved through coordination, flexibility, and speed. The German Panzer brigades, committed piecemeal and deprived of reconnaissance aircraft, were forced to advance blind into an enemy who could see, move, and strike faster. The result was annihilation. For the men who fought in the Hellcat, the memories of Lorraine remained vivid long after the war. They remembered the sound of engines echoing in the fog, the shock of impact when a round found its mark, the brief silence that followed each kill, and the knowledge that their survival depended on movement and trust. Many of them were barely in their 20s, serving in crews where teamwork was the difference between life and death. When General Patton later reflected on the campaign, he praised the tank destroyer units as exemplars of American initiative. Their success, he said, came not from numbers but from brains, guts, and speed. In an army often criticized for its heavy reliance on material superiority, the Hellcat crews demonstrated that technology alone was never enough. It was the human element, the calm of a commander under fire, the instinct of a gunner adjusting aim through smoke, the driver's reflex to reposition an instant before the next shot, that turned a lightweight machine into a weapon capable of defeating Germany's finest armor. Arracourt also carried broader lessons for the future of mechanized warfare. It revealed that flexibility and information could outweigh sheer firepower, foreshadowing doctrines that would later dominate modern armored tactics. The M18's combination of speed, a powerful main gun, and an adaptable crew became a model for post-war designs focused on mobility and situational awareness. In its own quiet way, the Hellcat bridged the gap between the heavy iron of World War II and the more agile armored vehicles of the Cold War era. For Germany, the defeat was devastating. The Panzer brigades, conceived as instruments to restore the Reich's offensive power, were destroyed within weeks of their creation. The loss of hundreds of tanks in Lorraine crippled the German ability to resist the Allied advance. When the Ardennes offensive came 3 months later, it would rely on remnants and reserves. The veteran crews who might have led it were gone, their machines wrecked in the fields around Arracourt. And yet, even in the ruins of Lorraine, one name endured, a symbol not of destruction, but of the speed and nerve that defined victory. Today, the name M18 Hellcat still evokes the paradox of the American approach to war, a machine so light that enemies dismissed it, yet so effective that it reshaped the battlefield. It stood as proof that technology could serve strategy, not the other way around. Its crews entered battle knowing that armor could not save them, that only speed, coordination, and nerve could, and in doing so, they turned fragility into strength. When historians speak of Arracourt, they often note its statistics, the ratios of losses, the tactical diagrams, the movements of brigades. But beyond the numbers lies a deeper story, of young men who trusted an unorthodox doctrine and a machine that demanded courage to master. Against the fog, the cold, and an enemy renowned for its armored might, they fought with precision and endurance until the field was theirs. By the time the smoke cleared and the last echoes of gunfire faded, the Germans' laughter at the paper tank had long since stopped. The battlefield itself had become their answer. Across the rolling farmland of Lorraine, the twisted hulls of Panthers and Panzer IVs bore silent witness to the triumph of speed over steel, and to the truth that ingenuity and determination could defeat even the most formidable war machines of the age. The M18 Hellcat had fulfilled its purpose. It was fast, deadly, and decisive, and at Arracourt, it proved that the lightest armor could carry the heaviest victory.